Elna Baker. Alright, so everyone has their kind of model of what's beautiful. And for me, growing up, my grandmother was the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen. She kind of looked like Grace Kelly. And there is this picture of her when she was young, like 25, that was in the hallway. And I used to, anytime I visited, I would just sit in front of that picture and daydream. And in that picture, she was wearing the sacred dress. And I knew that this dress was sacred because I could play dress up with all of her clothes except for this dress. And the origin of the dress is my grandfather had served in the war, and when he was going through Japan, he found this really beautiful black silk brocade fabric with red cherries on it. And he carried it all through the war, and he brought it home to my grandmother. And for 2 years, she worked on this dress. And she was an amazing seamstress. And the dress is sort of like swooped off the shoulders, came in really tight at the waist, and then flowed out to the ground. And I would look at her in this picture wearing the dress, and I would daydream the same thing every time. I was all grown up. I was finally beautiful. I was wearing the dress. And I was on a date with Brian Abert, the most popular boy in first grade. And I daydreamed this so much that one day I couldn't take it anymore. I snuck into the closet, I got the dress out, took it out of the plastic, and I put it on, and I stood in front of the mirror, and I went to zip it up, and it didn't fit. I was 7 years old, and I was too fat to fit in my grandmother's dress. And you know, I was always chubby. I think at my heaviest, I weighed 260 pounds. And I remember as it happened, you know, I used to play this game with myself where I would squeeze the fat on my stomach, and I would say like, oh, it's a tangerine. And then I got a little heavier, and I was like, it's an orange. And I was like, it's a grapefruit. And I was like, I hate this game. And you know, I think that I was made aware of the fact that I was different because I was heavy my whole life. When we were, I was 12, my family took this trip to the Middle East, and we were in Morocco. We were walking down the street, and this man saw my older sister, who was very beautiful, and he stopped my parents and he said, "Your daughter is so beautiful. I will give you 1,000 camels for your daughter." And my parents were like, "Oh, no, thank you," and they sort of pushed her behind. And then this man, he looked at me, and he was like, "Well, I'll give you 100 camels for that one." And even as a child, I was like, 900 camels? There's a 900 camel difference between me and my sister. But like, the rest of my life can literally just be described as a pursuit to be worth more camels. And you know, I was heavy, and I think that when you're heavy, you kind of have to work on your personality or finding other ways to make people love you. And so I loved myself, and I knew how to be a good person. And it's weird now that I think about it, but it was myself was what was inside of me and not my body. And I had no awareness of my body or what it looked like or that it was even there. And life was better when I thought that way. And then, you know, I got to be 22, and I remember one day I was waiting for the subway, and it was really crowded, all these people there, and this man very loudly stopped me and said, "Girl, you need to lose weight." Screamed it at me, and it was so awkward. Can you imagine being on the subway? And you're just like, everyone's not looking, and I'm not looking, and I just remember saying, don't cry, don't cry. And I sat on the train, and I was trying so hard not to cry, and this voice popped into my head. And it wasn't me, and it just said, "You are what you are." And I started repeating it, and I was like, I am what I am, I am what I am, I am what I am. And I did that every day for probably 8 months. It became this mantra. And I would repeat it every day to the point where I wasn't just me, I was me in my body. And I started to be aware of what it was like to have the body I had, and I started caring about the food that I put into my body. And I went to see a nutritionist, and I started running. And in 5.5 months, I lost, I guess altogether it was 120 pounds. Which is like, you know, the equivalent of pooping out a model. You know, and I remember I still had this mantra. I was like, I am what I am. This doesn't make a difference. I am what I am. But it made a huge difference. And I remember I first started noticing it when I would walk down the street and I would pass someone who was attractive, and they would kind of look at me and they would do this thing that never happened before. They would nod. And I was like, are they kidding on me? But then I would an attractive woman, and she would nod. And then all of a sudden I was like, oh my God, there's a beautiful people club in New York City. And like the nod is their secret handshake. And they think that I'm a member. I'm not a member. And and then like I also was like, I could fit a size 6. I'd never been able to do that. And that was like a point towards being pretty. Or if a guy picked up on me, that was another point. And so suddenly I forgot I had a mantra. And all I just wanted to do was get as many points for being pretty as possible so that I could prove that this was really happening to me. And in the midst of this, I went to visit my grandparents. And the first thing I did when I got there was like, get me to your closet. And I pulled out my grandmother's dress and she let me try it on. And I put it on and I zipped it up and it fit perfectly. And for the first time, like in the midst of all of this, I like stood still and I thought, I can't believe what I did. I don't even look like me anymore. And my grandmother and my grandfather, they started crying. And they were so proud of me. And my grandmother said, you can have this dress. And I took it. And I went back to New York and I thought, all right, I'm finally pretty. I have the dress. Where's Brian Aker, the most popular boy? I was like, but I'm in New York City. Like, how do you even know what's popular? But luckily, at the time, I belonged to a church group for Mormons who live in Manhattan. It wasn't that lucky, actually. But they have these single events for other Mormons to go and meet and mingle. And I didn't really go to them because it always felt like high school. There were like popular Mormons and not popular Mormons. And nobody drank or had sex, but there's still the system. And so I started going to these events again, but most of the guys recognized me from when I was heavy, so I didn't really find anyone to talk to or meet. And then Doug moved in. And Doug was by far the most popular boy to ever frequent the Mormon singles scene, and the women just lost their shit. I mean, and it was crazy. They were like breaking their faucets for him to fix, or like baking cookies left and right. And every woman wanted him, and that's when it hit me. He's the most popular boy in first grade. He will be mine. So I started to try to go after Doug. But I'd never had a boyfriend before. I had no experience with guys. And so I turned to manuals for help, and I bought like, He's Just Not That Into You, Sex and the Single Girl, which is pointless when you're Mormon, Why Men Marry Bitches. And I was reading all these manuals, but the thing I found most helpful was actually this manual that my mother had gotten in the 60s, and it was called Fascinating Girl. And it was all about how to get a man by reverting to the 1920s style of fascination. And, I read the book and it just seemed like a joke. It was like, a man loves a beauty in distress, so create a situation where he can save you. And I was like, this can't possibly work. But the next time I was at church with Doug, I tripped and I dropped all of my belongings out of my purse and I was like, oh! And he swooped down and he was like, I got you, darling. Oh my God, this is like the best idea ever. So I started trying all these methods out on him. And the more I tried them out, timorousness, look it up, ladies. It is your best weapon. So I tried all these things on him, and then it finally happened. Doug picked me. He chose me. He asked me out. And it was like, I remember all these Mormon girls just sort of like stopped, and everyone who had never paid attention to me before looked at me. And I looked back at them, and in a look, I said, go fuck yourself. Which I had never behaved. I think I was just super starving at the time. I had never behaved this competitively before, but I was like, I won. And it was the night of the date, and I, of course, wore my grandmother's dress, and we went out to a fancy restaurant, and we had a good time together. And then after, he asked if I wanted to get dessert. Now at this point, I was still actually on my diet. I hadn't had sugar in months, but I loved Tasty Delight. Do you remember Tasty? It was like Pinkberry, but now Pinkberry's, I think Tasty Delight is totally out of business, but it's like a frozen yogurt that's 40 calories. So I was like, how about we go to Tasty Delight? So we went, and we go into this Tasty Delight, and right as we walk in, Doug says, I don't understand these places. Like, ice cream is so much better. And I was like, well, yeah, but ice cream has like 320 calories, and Tasty Delight only has 40 calories. And he's like, yeah, I guess it's just something so you don't get fat. I just cannot tolerate fat people. And he said it, and it was one of those things that you hear, and everything inside of you is like, pretend that didn't happen. I still want to love you. I love you. You would love me 3 months ago. But then in my head, I just thought, the wording I cannot tolerate. Like, a person cannot tolerate lactose. You can tolerate someone who's fat. So I said sort of very politically correct. I was like, well, I think fat people, are very good people, and I think they often get judged by others, and I think that that's not fair, or something to that effect. And he was like, yeah, I guess you're right. I guess fat people are nice or bitter. Most of them seem pretty bitter. And then he took my hand in his, and we left Tasty Delight, and we went on a walk through the park. And I tried so hard to be happy and to think that it was everything I wanted. But I just could not shake the idea that if this were 5 months ago, I would never be here. And all of the work that I'd done, it was almost like to prove to this person who I used to be that I could have it. That person, it was never available to them. And that made me so sad. And I thought about the dress, and about the person I was trying to be, and about the things that really made my grandmother beautiful. And I decided I wanted those things more. Thank you.